Now to work with numbers, I'm back in the REPL, or right now, to be precise, only in the terminal or command prompt of my machine. We enter the Python REPL by typing Python, assuming that Python was installed, which we did in the first course module. Now once you hit enter, you're in the Python REPL, and you can always quit it by hitting Ctrl-Z. Now let's get back into it though. A number is simply something like this, 2. If I hit enter, it just basically prints out what I entered. Now often you work with data, so not just with numbers, but also with strings and booleans, by storing them in so-called variables. Variables are data containers, you could say, which you define. So you could create a variable by simply typing a name for it, which could be age. The name is totally up to you. And then the variable only becomes useful if you store a value in it. So you can think of a variable as an address, like the number of your house. You then store something in there by adding an equal sign, and on the right side of the equal sign, you write what you want to store in that address, so in that variable. For example, 29, which would be my age. If you hit enter here in the REPL, it will not output anything, but if you now just type age, it will print out the value you stored in age. Now this already is a very useful and important part you gotta understand. We will work with variables a lot in this course. Any program uses a lot of variables because, as the name suggests, they allow you to do dynamic calculations. You cannot just hard-code a value in there, you can also manipulate that value whilst your program runs. For example here, if I type age again, it again prints 29 because that's the value which we stored, and it keeps that in memory. It does not clear it after we output it one time. And if we now, for example, set age equal to 30, and I type age again, it changed it. It overrode this. We could also write age equals age minus 1. So now we would take the previous value which we stored in age, deduct 1 from it, and store that new value, which is calculated on the right side of the equal sign, back into the age variable. If I hit enter and type age again, it now outputs 29 for that reason. And this is the usefulness of variables. We can do a lot with them. We can run all types of calculation, store in between results, which we might need at a later point of time in our program, and of course, also output them to the users. And thus far, in this case here, we only worked with numbers, with integers to be precise, with numbers that don't have a decimal place. Of course, you can also store floats in a variable, like here. Now it's 29.5, and if I output this, we see 29.5. And obviously, you're not limited to numbers. You can also create a variable which is named isOld. The naming convention here, by the way, in Python is to name it like this. If you got one variable that consists of multiple words, you cannot write isOld with a blank. That's invalid. It has to be one word. But to still make it easier to read, you use underscores to separate words. So you got all lowercase names with underscores between the different words. This ensures readability and is valid Python syntax. But back to what I originally wanted to say, you can store, for example, true in here. That's a Boolean. Do you remember that slide? True and false. Now you got isOld in here. And with that, you can of course also output that. And later, once we learn about conditional checks, you can use that to check if isOld is true, because let's say that is calculated dynamically, and then run a different code if that is the case, instead of running the normal code, which you might run if isOld is false. Now, last but not least, let's also have a look at strings. If I enter name, the important part here is the quotation marks. So single or double quotation marks, both works, and then the text. In this case, max. Make sure to also close the quotation marks. Now, if you output this, you got the name printed here. So these are the 3 core values or data types with which we work in Python. Numbers, where we have integers and floats, booleans, where we have true and false, and strings, which are just text, enclosed by double or single quotation marks.